ברוכים הבאים לפסטיבל הסרטים היהודי בלוס אנג'לס. הערב הקרינו כאן את הסרט התיעודי על יוני נתניהו, וזה התחיל בסרט קצר בצורת אנימציה על מבצע אנטבה עצמו. הייתה כאן הקרנה נהדרת, האולם היה מלא.
I played your brother in the film Raid on the Tebby. And more importantly, when I stood at his grave, that spirit entered me, and I have carried on, in some sense, with his memory, to serve the Jewish people. And I'm at the point now, a year away from becoming ordained as a Jewish chaplain. It was his spirit. So it doesn't have to be what fiction does, it's what you carry away with you having entered the spirit of your brother. Thank you very much.
I don't know how many people wanted to make a movie. I know those who approached us, or Andrew approached me and gave me, told me about his intention of making a movie. I think since you were a teenager, right? Since the operation itself, it was a lifelong dream, and he sounded very sincere and sounded like someone who was going to do it, who will be able to do it. And so I was happy to cooperate with him and provide him with, names of people who participated and spoke to them and told them that he's okay, that they can be interviewed by him. And so the animated movie that you saw about Entebbe came about, which is actually a part of a larger movie that he intends to make about Entebbe. He actually decided at a certain point in time, and maybe Andrew can talk about it, is to take the small passages of animation and create a separate short animated movie, which I think is very successful. As to Ari Pinchot, the maker of the Follow Me movie, I think it came to be maybe more than 15 years ago, with the idea of making a movie about Yoni based on his letters.
Why animation? First and foremost, to be able to, animation gives you this incredible option to be able to create time periods and to travel between time periods and storylines in a more kind of flexible way than possibly recreating set pieces and doing the kinds of recreations that you'd see in let's say, other historical pieces, or let's say Discovery Channel, for instance. Animation gave you that, that instant leap of being able to say, well, this was 1941, this is 1976, and based on real images that you'd see, you were able to kind of work around it.
And could you just describe why you chose, how you found the Cohen on the Bridge story, and why you chose that as the framing device?
One of the more important characters in the actual Entebbe, the mission and the raid itself and final execution was that one character, Amir Afer, who was inadvertently found himself to be the very first commando, the very first member of the unit to get into the building, and that's his story. And I thought I knew his story fairly well, and interviewing him was fascinating. And except that at one point during the interview, and he kind of had told us certainly a lot of the things that we thought that we already knew. And then at one point he said, I want to tell you a story. And we were all kind of very captivated because he's a very compelling character, and he's it's living history. So you're sitting 18 inches away from your subject, you're asking questions, he's telling these things, and you're looking into his eyes and you're listening to the stories, and you're like, wow, this is really amazing. And then he says, I'm going to tell you a story. And you're like, okay, this is a story outside the story that you think you already know. And he starts, it was 1941 in Yugoslavia. He starts telling me the Cohen on the Bridge story, and it's the most arcane reference that I could possibly imagine for that moment. I don't know where he's going with the story. And as the story starts to unfold, I start to understand that this is a deeply personal story, and all of a sudden he's basically stepped off the line of what he was going to tell us in terms of what the Entebbe story was, in terms of his immediate recollections of that 1976 period. And all of a sudden he's traveling back and he's telling us the story. And then when he starts saying, that, and he told it basically just like that. We kind of broke up that story, but that was the story. And it says, the woman was my grandmother, and the two kids were, my father and sister. And you're sitting there and you're like, you're stunned, and all of a sudden you understand that this concept of rescue, this extraordinary event, travels over generations and time and space, and can happen by the simplest and very profound act of one individual, and ends up saving thousands of other people in terms of generations after those 100 people are saved, many, many years later. So I was really taken by that. And as soon as he finished telling that story, I said, to my guys, I said, let's take a 5-minute break. And I walked outside his house and I walked around for a couple of minutes. I said, that's like one of the best stories I've ever heard in my entire life. Were there people in the airport that were impressed? One of the lead pilot of the C-130s, Joshua Shikishani, several years after the Entebbe mission, was invited to Washington to lecture a group of international warriors by our government. And when he got up to speak, the Saudi delegate that had been in the room got up as one man, and they all walked out of the room, completely snubbing him. So he took in stride, and he told his stories, and he got rousing ovation. And then later on, it was either later that day or the next day, he went to work out at whatever the athletic club was that they were sent to go to work out. And he finishes working out, and he goes in the sauna. And he's in the sauna, he sits down in the cloud of smoke, and he looks over and he realizes he's not alone in the sauna, but the Saudi general is in the sauna with him. So he's like, I'm in the sauna, this guy's in the sauna, we're naked, I'm going to ignore this guy, I'm Shikishani, and end of story. But the story doesn't end there, because what happens is they sit in this kind of uncomfortable silence with the steam billowing away, and at one point, the Saudi general stands up, puts his towel on, walks across the room, and he has to pass Shani to get to the door. As he walks by, he looks around just to make sure he's alone. And he turns to Shani, sticks his hand down, he shakes his hand, and says, "Good job." Walks out the door. They never spoke again, they never acknowledged one another again. But it was in that moment that Shani said, it was a pretty interesting moment for him.
What do you think the best way for all of us here in America and around the world is to honor Yoni's memory?
Well, that's very simple. It's to support Israel. The conditions have not changed today very much from what they were in 1976 and what they were before that. In a sense, the dangers have increased. The country is literally fighting for its survival. As we were much stronger than we were in 1976. But as you all know, the dangers, or the danger from a certain area in the Middle East is much greater. And there's, beyond that, there is certainly a growing sense of isolation of Israel and the international community, thanks to the hypocrisy of the West. And the only real country that can be, that is supporting Israel in any meaningful way is the U.S. And the support of the U.S. is in many ways dependent on the American Jewish population that's living here. So yes, there's a lot that can be done in memory of Yoni, and that's what should be done.
Thank you all for coming.